I'd like to call the meeting of council to order. Dave? We'll start with a moment of silence when you can reflect. Thank you. I'm going to start the meeting and ask if there's any declarations of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Maybe.
Sorry, it's been a bit of a scramble today. I'd like to declare a conflict with respect to the motion from Councillor Harris to the nature of my employment with a signatory contractor.
Thank you. We're going to start with the public delegations, and the first person, and you have 5 minutes, is Ian DeWaard, Christian Labour Association of Canada. Welcome, Ian.
Chair Redmond and to regional councillors, thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. I'll be sharing my time with my colleague Sean Reid, who's here on behalf of an organization. He'll introduce the PCA. So again, my name is Ian DeWaard, and I represent an organization called the CLAC. We're a union that represents 60,000 workers in Canada, and more than 5,000 of those work as skilled construction workers here in Ontario. We're here today to speak in favour of the resolution that will be put before this body tonight by Councillor Harris, which proposes that this council voice its support for Bill 66. The story of two workers who unionized the region while assembling a garden shed one Saturday morning in 2012 is well known, I'm sure, to most of you here. That simple garden shed made the region subordinate to a province-wide collective agreement that this region did not negotiate. Since then, major construction work paid for by the region has been closed to all but a few select contractors who are also unionized with that same construction craft union. This very same story has played out in the city of Hamilton, which was unionized in 2007 when workers there erected a play structure at a city park. The city of Sault Ste. Marie, which recently passed its own resolution supporting Bill 66, has been bound to 2 construction union collective agreements since 1987. Likewise, the City of Toronto is treated as a construction contractor for the purposes of the Labour Relations Act. All told, nearly $2.5 billion of annual municipal construction work spent annually in Ontario is caught up in closed tendering. It's important for Council to know that CLAC, as well as AMO, the Chambers of Commerce, and various contractor associations, some of which are represented here tonight, as well as others, have been lobbying the provincial government throughout these last years to effect a change in the Ontario Labour Relations Act. It has been the contention of these many stakeholders that that act is flawed and in need of an amendment so that municipal governments are not lumped in with construction contractors. As the resolution before you makes clear, Schedule 9 of Bill 66 amends the definition of what's called a non-construction employer. Doing so will not deprive a worker of the right to unionize or impede their right to bargain collectively with the region. Bill 66 simply sets out a bright line between construction and non-construction employers. In doing so, workers will be offered a different path to unionization, those that do construction for municipal governments, thereby altering how collective bargaining is conducted. Historically, CLAC members and non-union workers and the contractors that employ them have performed a significant amount of work for this region and for other closed municipalities. In 2018, 91% of our members told us that advocating to end closed tendering needed to be our union's highest priority, as 85% of them believed that they were being directly affected by it. So on behalf of CLAC's members, and especially those that are both workers and taxpayers in this region, we urge you to support the motion and to support the labour relations reform that's contained in Bill 66. With that, I'll turn to my colleague, Sean Reid.
Thanks, Ian. Good evening. My name is Sean Reid. I'm the Vice President and Regional Director for Ontario, the Progressive Contractors Association of Canada. Our members employ thousands of workers across Ontario who are affiliated with the CLAC and have built major infrastructure projects across the province, including water and wastewater facilities, schools, bridges, roads, airports, and hospitals, and many more of the key infrastructure that are so key to this region and to those across the province. For many years, our organization has promoted fair and open construction tendering for all Ontario municipalities, including the region of Waterloo. This allows all qualified workers and businesses to compete for work on public construction projects based on the quality of their work and the competitiveness of their bids, rather than the union affiliation of their workers. And on behalf of our local member companies in the region, we urge Council to make fairness and value for public taxpayer dollars a priority by supporting Councillor Michael Harris's resolution to endorse the Labour Relations Act amendment contained in Bill 66. Bill 66 would allow the region of Waterloo and all other municipalities to openly tender construction work by excluding them from the construction employer provisions of the Act. Council has an important opportunity to help right a costly wrong, and that's gone on for far too long in the region. As you know, bid lists have shrunk nearly, in some cases, up to 85% in the region since restrictive tendering has come into force. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that when you shrink competition by that much, prices will go up. Value for money should be a priority for all levels of government, including the region of Waterloo. A 2017 Forum Research poll commissioned by PCA showed that 86% of the region of Waterloo residents support scrapping the provincial policy that makes public construction projects far more expensive than they should be. Councillor Harris's resolution sends a strong signal that the region of Waterloo is working to maximize its infrastructure investments and ensure local workers, local companies, and taxpayers are treated fairly. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. I see no questions from council. I would just like to underscore that you were both registered, so you each got your own 5-minute allocation because Mr. DeWaard actually used up all of his. Thank you very much for your intervention. I see no questions. The next delegation is Jim Kelly, Ontario Sewer and Watermain Construction Association. Welcome, Mr. Kelly. You get a whole 5 minutes too.
Thank you. Good evening, Chairperson Redmond and members of Regional Council. My name is Jim Kelly, and I'm General Manager and Vice President of Capital Paving, a locally based heavy civil construction company who tenders and completes a large volume of work within the region of Waterloo. I'm also a member of the Board of Directors of the Ontario Sewer and Watermain Construction Association, but I'm here this evening to specifically represent the contractor members of the Conestoga Heavy Construction Association, of which I am a past president and a current member of the Tender Practice Committee. With me this evening is our current president, Mr. Jeff Fisk, and our immediate past president, Mr. Harry Van Dyke. We are an association of 36 construction companies who live and headquarter our business in the region of Waterloo and surrounding areas, which means we are also taxpayers within the region as well. The CHCA member companies are of various union affiliations, and a large portion of our membership has no union affiliations. In total, our membership directly employs well over 2,000 women and men, and indirectly employs in the tens of thousands. One of our founding principles is an open, fair, and transparent tendering process. This was fundamental to our association when it was founded in 1979 and remains a cornerstone some 40 years later. We are the companies who have historically built your roads, bridges, water mains, sewer lines, pumping stations, parking lots, and countless other infrastructure across this region. And we are the companies who want to continue to build this infrastructure to keep work, our employees, and business local. To do this, I'm here this evening to request your support for the resolution put forward by Councillor Michael Harris to support the changes to the Ontario Labour Relations Act and Bill 66 related to open tendering. Since 2014, the region has been required by law to only allow companies unionized by the Carpenters Union to build your taxpayer-funded ICI infrastructure. Any company not unionized by the Carpenters have been banned from bidding on these projects, even though simply affiliated with other unions. This has been artificially restricting the number of bids and bidders on your work and has resulted in increased costs to your infrastructure. This is unnecessary and unfair. Right now, a contractor in our association could build a bus shelter for the city of Kitchener, but not the region of Waterloo, simply because of their union affiliation. All we require is a fair chance to bid for your project work. We want to be able to provide the best quality work for the best price for your local taxpayers, because our members and their employees live here too. Ontario is the only province in Canada where municipalities can still be classified as construction employers. And at a time of limited government funds, all governments have a responsibility to ensure that every dollar the government spends goes as far as possible. The change proposal to the Labour Relations Act and Bill 66 will help to do just that. It will open back up the construction market to all local bidders. It will mean that companies that built your waste treatment plants, roads, and bridges 25 years ago will be able to provide you with a quote to rehabilitate this infrastructure when that time comes. We are here asking you to support a resolution that would give all of your local construction companies a fair shake, because we want to be able to continue to bid the work on projects in the region as we've been doing for decades. It will mean better prices for local taxpayers and local men and women be able to work on local projects. So please, this evening, support the resolution put forward by Councillor Harris. Thank you for your consideration.
You have 48 seconds to spare. Thank you very much, Mr. Kelly. I see no questioners. Thank you for coming this evening. The next delegation is Art Sinclair, Vice President, Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce. Welcome, Art.
Thank you, Chair Redmond and members of Council. I appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight in support of the resolution tabled by Councillor Harris. I think, as probably everyone around the table would be aware, the Chamber has been quite supportive of this particular, Mr. Harris's position on this particular issue for the past 6 years. We were just discussing it was November of 2012 when this started with respect to the infamous shed in Baden. But, I think over the last couple of, last 2 years, one of the benefits of an issue extending itself, and of course there are very few benefits of a long-standing issue like this. You want to get it settled ASAP, but one of the benefits is we've been able, I think as a Chamber of Commerce and Cardis, the think tank down in Hamilton, has provided some excellent analysis on the cost of restricted tendering, both here in Waterloo region and Hamilton, Sault Ste. Marie, and to a limited extent the City of Toronto. And I think that work has been very invaluable to us as we've been lobbying the provincial government to enact some change, which of course is incorporated in Bill 66. But another point that I'd like to bring up, within the Canadian Chamber of Commerce and the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, every year at their annual general meetings, both organizations invite Chambers of Commerce and Boards of Trades from across Ontario for the Ontario Chamber and across Canada for the Canadian Chamber of Commerce to propose policy resolutions which go before the AGM every year, and if 2/3 of the delegates in attendance support a particular policy resolution, then that becomes Canadian Chamber policy. And this year at our annual general meeting of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Thunder Bay, a resolution was put forward by our colleagues at the Langley, British Columbia Chamber of Commerce, Langley being a suburb of Vancouver, with respect to the issue of restricted tendering emerging across Canada. Now, there are a couple of points that were brought up. This resolution from the Langley Chamber of Commerce pointed to the research from Cardis, and specifically the region of Waterloo, and the cost to taxpayers here of restricted tendering, how that was inflated infrastructure costs. But some other things that were pointed out, there have been many examples of restricted tendering across Canada. One that was pointed out was Manitoba Hydro, who have in the past instituted a number of restricted tendering policies. And of course, if you're aware, probably most of us are, Manitoba Hydro is a large corporation, has undertaken a lot of large projects, particularly in northern Manitoba. These are huge. And in fact, they have in the past, and this has been very been highly criticized by a lot of businesses in Manitoba. They have instituted a lot of restricted tendering policies that have shut out a lot of businesses in Manitoba and across Canada. And also was pointed out by Langley Chamber of Commerce was the British Columbia government has in the last number of months taken some initiatives to move towards restricted tendering in the province of British Columbia. So of course, I think the point here is, in fact, this is an emerging issue for businesses across Canada. And I think it's incumbent or a good thing for the region of Waterloo to be out front of this. And I think supporting Mr. Harris's resolution is an important first step to addressing this critical issue for businesses across Canada. And as I think the previous presenters have indicated as well, it's important for our local businesses here as well. So again, we would ask your support on this important initiative. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sinclair. I see no questions, so thank you for taking the time to come and express your views. Is there anybody else in the chamber that would like to speak to this issue, or any other for that matter? I see no takers. Okay, I am going to ask Councillor Harris if he would like to bring his notice of motion forward and speak to it. We'll deal with that right now, and I understand that Councillor Galloway is the seconder, so I would allow you both a chance to speak to it if you care to. Sure. Oh, you want to be on? Less voice drain.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I, Michael Harris, hereby give notice that I intend to introduce the following motion at January 16, 2019 meeting of Regional Council. Whereas municipalities are not construction employers and have a different purpose and mandate from businesses in the construction industry, and whereas the region of Waterloo is currently treated like a business for the purpose of the construction industry provision in the current Labour Relations Act, limiting access to a fair and open tendering process. And whereas prior to the 2014 union certification, the region of Waterloo received on average 8.1 bids by contractors for each tender. And whereas following union certification, the region of Waterloo received on average 3.7 bids per tender, a reduction of more than 50%. And whereas on December 6, 2018, the provincial government introduced Bill 66, Restoring Ontario's Competitiveness Act 2018, which among other things changes the Labour Relations Act to remove municipalities from the definition of construction employers. And whereas such a legislative change would ensure the region of Waterloo receives more bids on infrastructure projects, which could save anywhere between 30 and 3%, translating into significant savings for local taxpayers. And whereas an amendment to the Labour Relations Act 1995, as proposed by Bill 66, would ensure fairness for all workers, regardless of their affiliation with a particular union, by guaranteeing the right to work on publicly funded infrastructure projects. And whereas municipalities will be able to tender construction work in a free and open competitive environment to maximize potential local involvement and a greater number of potential bidders. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the region of Waterloo support the amendments to the Labour Relations Act contained within Bill 66 to ensure municipalities are not defined as construction employers, and encourage all members of the legislature to support its passage. And that a copy of this resolution be circulated to the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, Minister of Economic Development, Trade and Employment, Todd Smith, Minister of Labour, Laurie Scott, all local MPPs in the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, AMO.
Thank you. Councillor Galloway, do you wish to speak to it as a seconder?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I'm pleased to second the motion. Just very briefly, as far as I'm concerned, this is not pro or anti-union. This is pro-taxpayer.
Thank you. Councillor Kiefer.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I too am pleased to support the motion. When I was listening to Mr. Sinclair from the chamber, he mentioned about nationally across the country, and I'm just wondering if we shouldn't add the FCM and possibly our local MPs as well, if that's a friendly enough suggestion.
Absolutely, good idea, Carl.
Okay, Councillor Galloway, do you deem that a friendly amendment as well? Okay, we'll add that to the motion. I see no other questioners or any speakers, so do you want to have another word, Michael?
Just to wrap up, I mean, this has been a long-standing issue here in the region. It's an important measure contained within Bill 66. Obviously, that bill contains a variety of items, but this one in particular does hit home for sure in terms of its fairness aspect to local contractors and their employees, but more importantly, the fairness for taxpayers, knowing that with every dollar that is out there, we can stretch it as far as we can going forward once this legislative change is proclaimed. So thank you for all those support in terms of this resolution.
Sorry? A recorded vote. Oh, I'm going to take chair's privilege and just make two quick comments. And one is that we are on record as a previous council lobbying for this. So this is a change we embrace. But just a word to some of the delegations. Bill 66 is an omnibus bill, and it touches something like 13 pieces of legislation. So while we really support this, we are on record as cautioning against some of the Planning Act changes and protections of groundwater that we think are problematic. So Bill 66 has many aspects. This is one that certainly this council can support. Leanne, recorded vote?
Plus is yes.
Sorry?
Thanks a lot.
Plus is yes, minus is no.
Plus is yes, minus is no.
Start vote.
Yeah, if you're nice to me, I can tell you what the result was.
Is this election night?
We'll be here till tomorrow if it's last election night.
So yes, 15, conflict 1, and 0 no's.
So unanimously supported with Councillor Strickland demonstrating he had a conflict. So congratulations, well done, and we will follow up and send this motion in those letters to the appropriate MPPs and MPs as we were directed. Next, we have approving the minutes of previous meetings, and there's quite a list there, starting back at December the 11th. I would ask if there's any questions pertaining to any of those. If not, I would take a motion moved by Councillor Vrbanovic, seconded by Councillor Renz. Any questions? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Everybody has received electronic versions of any of the information in correspondence to Council. Is there any item a Councillor would like to highlight or raise at this point in time? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to go into Committee of the Whole to consider reports. Moved by Councillor Armstrong, seconded by Councillor Foxton. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. So reports. We have Finance Committee report.
Finance reports.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Strickland, seconded by Councillor Jowett. Do you want to speak to them briefly? They're all tenders, basically.
Several finance reports.
I don't have my screen to turn your mic on, sorry.
Talk loud.
Talk loud.
The first finance reports was to accept the tender for Laurel Standpipe wet interior recoating in the amount of $2.1 million. The second one was to accept a proposal of Viola Water Technologies in the amount of $1.8 million for filters at the Galt Wastewater Treatment Plant. An additional finance report was the purchase of 13 commercial 3/4-ton cargo vans for $647,000 from Parkway Ford, and also a finance report to purchase hybrid aerial trucks from Alltech for an amount of $307,000, and transit coaches in the amount of $6.7 million from Nova Bus was the final finance report.
Thank you, Councillor Strickland. I'm going to go and believe this panel and say, does Councillor Jaworski wish to speak?
Thank you. Through the chair, I would just want to have a question of staff regarding the transit coaches. So the transit coaches is a 5-year agreement, and we're obviously just in the first few months of council, so we're making a commitment for the rest of the term of council. And I see, I do know from discussions last time around that we're very interested in electric buses. However, this doesn't encapsulate the electric buses, and there's a paragraph there that describes it. I'm just wondering if staff could speak to the commitment here, which will actually be about $70 million over the life of its contract, and how we can be progressive in eliminating greenhouse gases through our transit system, how this doesn't preclude that, and what it does offer us in the contract.
Mr. Schmidt, would you like to answer that?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. This is typical. We've done these types of 5-year contracts for buses before. It does not absolutely commit us that we are going to be purchasing all of these buses. If at some point we choose to change technologies, we can do that, either through retendering and not ordering all the buses that are here. So the option of electric buses or hybrid buses still remains open, even though we have this tender in place to secure buses for the next 5 years.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Vrbanovic.
Thank you very much. And my question, there's a number of vehicles on here, and I guess it's really just prompting me to ask the question, particularly in regards to the transit buses, but just in general, and I don't expect necessarily a report today, but I would like to get an update on how we're doing in terms of our fleet of moving towards alternate fuels, in particular electric vehicles. I know in some of the more, industrial kinds of vehicles, that's more difficult and challenging. But we are seeing in Canadian climates, alternate fuel vehicles and so on being used more. I know we've experimented with it in the past. but I'd really like to sort of get maybe a bit of an update report on that at some point in the future. For I think all of council would benefit from it, because it also speaks to our commitment of 80-50. And that's probably the single biggest area we can have an influence in as an organization, is in our fleet. So,
Mr. Murray?
Yep, we can bring back a report providing a pretty comprehensive update. We call it greening the fleet, and we've been working on greening the fleet for years. One of the information papers in your budget package today actually provided a lot of information about a whole host of things that we've been doing to green the fleet. So we'll find an opportunity to take that, expand on a little bit and bring it back to probably committee at a subsequent meeting.
Yeah, I think it'd be a good committee discussion.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no other speakers, I would ask for the vote. All in favor? That's carried unanimously. Committee reports. Councillor Strickland, back to you.
Yes, a couple recommendations from the Budget Committee meeting of last week. The first recommendation is to approve the 2019 budget timetable, which included our meeting today, following meeting on February 6th, and also one on February 19th, which will be a final budget day. It also outlines the public engagement process for using the web, so the public can go to the regionalwaterloo.ca website and engage in the process and provide their comments. The second part of the resolution is just simply forwarding a copy of our opening position in terms of projected expenditures and tax rate increases to the police board. So I would move those two parts of the single motion, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Strickland, seconded by Councillor Lorentz. I see no speakers. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Councillor Galloway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd move the 4 recommendations from the committee meeting of last week, and to that I would add 2 recommendations coming out of closed session. The first of those is an agreement, a settlement agreement with a landowner on King Street East in the city of Cambridge relative to a road project. And the second is a settlement agreement with a contractor relative to the Kitchener Wastewater Treatment Plant lagoon decommissioning. And I'd like to speak briefly to 2 of the recommendations coming from the committee meeting of last week.
Would you like to do it at this point?
You want to get a second or?
Oh, sorry, seconded by Councillor Jaworski.
So, Madam Chair, Bill 66 is an omnibus bill, and we just dealt with another part of it earlier and actually supported it. But in this particular case, Bill 66, we're finding some considerable objection to. The first of the 2 recommendations comes from staff and the concerns that they laid out in their report, and which Council adopted. And the second recommendation is the motion that you yourself crafted and put before committee and was duly supported as well. And so what I'd like to say in support of these recommendations is that this particular region, this particular council has spent a lot of time over the years on its growth management strategy. And integral to that strategy are such things as the countryside line and the protected countryside, things that we cherish a lot to delineate between urban and rural areas, and to properly manage our land resources and physical resources in our particular region. And we have grave concern that these elements of Bill 66 being proposed by the province could erode a lot of that and give rise to some really some development that has potential very negative effects. And I think additionally we're concerned about what neighboring municipalities might do that could have great impacts on us as well and would be totally out of our control. And it's not only the planning aspect, it is also, I think, a concern of ours that we're expressing that unlike just about everything else we do where there has to be public input and process, this particular regulations or the bill that's being proposed would actually take away a lot of that process and allow decisions to be made behind closed doors. And that just seems to be counterintuitive to the way that we conduct ourselves. And I think the way we would like to continue to conduct ourselves, even if we had one of these major pieces of new employment or development that would potentially come to our community or a neighboring community as well. So, Madam Chair, I think it was supported unanimously, I believe, at committee, and I hope it's supported here again tonight. Thank you.
Okay, I would call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. I would point out again that it is unanimous, and I know that there are local councils that are thinking and acting on this as well. And I think that really speaks to the fact that we're cooperative and all pulling in the same direction. Councillor Armstrong?
Yeah, I was just going to comment that I agree with everything Tom said about the problems that could arise. And unfortunately, I think it would lead to a lot more walls being built on town lines.
Thank you for that. I will go back to Councillor Strickland for at Finance and Admin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. 3 recommendations from Admin and Finance. The first is to nominate Councillor Sue Foxton to be considered for the Southwestern Integrated Fiber Technology Board, SWIFT. The second one I referred to earlier with respect to the public engagement strategy for 2019 budget. And the third one is that we approve payment of 50% of the grant payment to the museum in advance of approval of the 2019 budget, as set out in a report dated January 8th. This is something we've done in the past. I so move, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Strickland, seconded by Councillor Armstrong. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. I move the 4 recommendations of the Community Services Committee meeting of January 8th, being the removal of 149 Ainsley Street from the list of potential CTS sites, the initiation of the consultation process for the remaining 4 potential CTS sites and other eligible sites that may be identified in Cambridge and Kitchener, the submission of a letter of intent to apply for CTS approval and funding to the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care, and the submission of a letter to the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care to reiterate the region's interest in assuming direct operation of the region's ambulance dispatch system.
So you're moving that. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Foxton. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Next on the agenda, we have Chief Administrative Officer. Mr. Murray, do you have anything you want to say? After that, we have Regional Chair. Yeah, really, it's written here. I just want to take one moment to commend my fellow councillors, Councillor Shantz and Kiefer. We are at the police board. Councillor Galloway left after 18 years of being a chair and left very big shoes to fill. But I think one of the strengths of our police services is the fact that they are so integrated into so many other services. We have just gone through looking at the budget process and how that plays into the regional budget process. And I think both the civilian and uniformed officers and their leadership especially are very cognizant of how they fit in with the rest of the things that Waterloo Region does. And we can look at their participation on community crime prevention and so many other ways where they really do look to the public to figure out how they can be of best service. So we're well served by them, and it's a great organization, and I will recognize Councillor Shantz.
Thank you. And you forgot to mention one other thing that happened today, and that is that Karen was elected as chair of the board.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. Yay, Tom. So other matters under Committee of the Whole. We have an appointment of the Sunnyside Board. So I'd ask if somebody's prepared to move. Moved by Councillor Rentz. This is appointment of Merlin McCrae to the Sunnyside Foundation Board. Seconder, Councillor Foxton. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. A motion for the Committee of the Whole to rise and Council to resume. Moved by Councillor Kiefer, seconded by Councillor Shantz. All those in favor? That is carried. Motion to adopt the proceedings of the Committee of the Whole. Moved by Councillor Foxton, seconded by Councillor Clark. All those in favor? Carried. Are there any notice of motions or any unfinished business any councillors have? Seeing none. I need a motion to enact the bylaws first, second, and third readings. Moved by Councillor Strickland, seconded by Councillor Armstrong. All those in favor? That is carried. A motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Bravanovic, seconded by Councillor McGarry. All those in favor? Thank you all. It's been a long day, but a good day.